You're listening to Psych with Mike. For more episodes or to connect with the show with comments, ideas, or to be a guest, go to www.psychwithmike.com. Follow the show on Twitter @PsychWithMike or like the Facebook page @PsychWithMike. Now, here's Psych with Mike.
Welcome into the Psych with Mike Library. This is Dr. Michael Mahan with Brett Newcomb.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm great.
Today, people would have no reason to know this, but today is St. Patrick's Day.
And they should be green with envy.
So they should be green with envy. Yeah. And St. Patrick's Day falls in the
So
middle.
why do they call jealousy the greed-eyed monster?
I have no idea.
I don't know.
Because
I thought you knew everything.
Because the sexiest M&M is green.
That's a good answer.
There you go.
As good as anything else.
All I know is Tucker Carlson is mad as hell about it.
Yeah, well, he gets a lot of money for being mad
Yes,
about
he
something.
does. Yes, he does.
He's mad because the toilet paper didn't come in time.
So I am in the middle of Lent, and I'm not Catholic.
Neither a lender nor a borrower be.
But I gave up ice cream for Lent, and I am telling you, we're in the middle. So we're right in the middle. We got 3 weeks more to go before Easter, and man, I am struggling. And I know.
So what you're telling me is come Easter Sunday, you're going to have a half gallon of ice cream?
I'm going to go out to Baskin Robbins and buy an ice cream cake, and I'm going to eat the whole thing by myself.
All right.
But and I know that is such a first world problem because worried about I'm really tense because I'm depriving myself of ice cream is so ridiculous, but it is my world right now.
Well, what's the premise behind depriving yourself of anything? Why should you do that?
Well, why wear a hair shirt? Because
No. Well, yeah, but I think there's a difference about that. We can talk about hair shirts in a minute, but let's talk about the concept of self-discipline and sacrifice.
Yeah.
Voluntary self-discipline and sacrifice.
I think it is.
Why would that be a benefit? Why would people do that?
Because if you don't have the ability to deprive yourself, then you don't have the ability to change direction when you decide that what you're doing is not healthy or appropriate. I think it's extremely educational for people to. I think in our society we don't know how to do that well enough. How to decide, I'm going to deprive myself of something, and then I'm going to use my own intestinal fortitude to actually follow through with it. I don't think we do very much of that in our society anymore.
So you see it as
I believe it builds character. Yes.
a volitional component
Yeah.
of character development.
Yes.
To consciously self-deny.
Right.
And each individual should select their own particular sacrifice.
I'm saying that I do that. I'm not saying that other people should do that.
Well, how should it be done?
But this is what I think is, so during this period of Lent, I'm denying myself ice cream, and I'm learning to cope with what the consequences of that are. In a school system, it's teaching someone to deny themselves of talking to their neighbor in class. That those are the same kinds of concepts.
Yeah, but I mean, for instance, if you set a universal, like, okay, for, 40 days of Lent, I'm going to deny myself eating meat. I'm going to eat fish instead. Or if it were reversed, so for the next 40 days I'm not going to eat fish. That's not a sacrifice for me. I don't eat that much fish. So to say, I won't eat fish until April.
Well, no, and that's why you have to pick something that actually matters. And that's why, for me, I picked ice cream because
But each individual person should then do that?
Well, I think...
Like in your family, you sit down and say, hey, guys, I think we should all sacrifice for Lent.
Again, I'm not espousing...
No, I'm not saying that you should do
But yes,
this
if you are going to do it, then each individual has to pick something that matters to them, that is significantly important to them.
You train yourselves to do this as a familial, parental responsibility.
I do it, and I make sure that everybody in my family knows it, so that because I am modeling
you talk about
the
all the time
behavior.
while they're sitting around eating ice cream and your tongue is hanging out.
Yes.
Saying, oh my God, I'll be so glad when I can have some of that ice cream.
Yes, that did.
And I can't believe you
happened.
did that in front of me because you knew I was trying to
never. No, I'm completely accepting that other people are not making the same choices that I'm making.
Because I know I've been around people that were smokers that just go crazy if somebody smokes around them, or people that were drinkers that say you can't have a drink because I had to give up alcohol.
Yeah. And I don't believe in any of that. I believe if you are making the choice for yourself, you're making the choice for yourself. You're not making that choice for other people. And I don't make the choice for other people in my family to give up something for Lent. I choose to do it.
If your wife says, "Hey, Michael, I'm giving up sex for Lent."
Yeah.
Good
I'd
luck.
say, what's the difference? No. But yeah, I
No,
think,
you say, "Oh, I will too."
yeah. Oh, that sounds good. So I think that if an individual makes that decision for themselves, they should accept that they have not made that decision for others in their lives, and they should be able to
Not
acknowledge
impose it on others.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, otherwise, I can't just impose on other people. Otherwise, we're just back to the whole entitlement thing. Everybody should do what I do. No,
Right.
Everybody shouldn't do what I do.
Okay. So why are we talking about all this in the first
So
place?
we're talking about that because the question that is in front of us today is, and we've alluded to this in other podcasts, is how dynamic, how changeable is a person's personality over time?
Malleable.
Yeah.
Yeah. And your assumption is that it's not particularly malleable over time?
I was taught in the 80s when I was an undergraduate, in the 90s when I was in graduate school, I was explicitly taught that personality was indelible, that it was pretty crystalline, that whatever you started out as was what you were going to end up as. And I believed that, and I promoted that idea for much of my career. Recently, I have, for other reasons that are personal to me, started to think that maybe I don't believe that.
Oh, or that hopefully it's not true.
Yeah.
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 I think if you're a therapist and you're trying to create a clinical environment for clients to experience personal growth, growth in the direction of they can identify, resolve, and heal from things that have hurt them, or identify and pursue things that they would like to incorporate in their world, that you have to believe in change. I believe that you have to believe that people can change. Otherwise, you're just a hypocrite.
Right. I believe that people, so in therapy, I believe that we can affect change in people's self-talk and maybe even some of their behaviors, but do we change foundationally their personality? So, for example, my father-in-law, God rest his soul, was a bigot. I mean, it was a horrible bigot. And that was really, really difficult for me to deal with. And I would have these conversations with my wife about how that was really, really difficult for me. And she knew that, but I tried to tolerate that for her sake. Eventually, he got sick with lung cancer. And during the period that he was in treatment, his personality changed very profoundly and very foundationally during that period of time. And I've always really tried to reinforce that in my wife, that, that her memory of her father when she was little is very different than the man that he ended up being before he passed away. And I saw that, and that really moved me. And again, through the course of some other things that have been going on, I really think that there is a way, or that it is possible for people to if you start out as a curmudgeon, do you have to die as a curmudgeon? Or if you start out as a complete hopeless optimist, are you going to be that way for the end of your days? Or can things happen that change foundationally that personality? And I'm starting to think that what I was taught in undergraduate and graduate school may not have been the whole truth. Not that anybody was intentionally trying to sell me a bill of goods that was inaccurate. I think that that's what, just like, the very first physiological psychology class that I ever took said that we had 100 million with an M brain cells, and now we know that we have hundreds of billions with a B brain cells. So our awareness of the truth of psychology evolves, and psychology is only a 100-year-old science. So I think that there's still lots of things to learn, and I think the malleability of the personality is one of those things that we are now recognizing is different than what we thought in the 70s and 80s.
I'm aware that I continually say to you, Michael, you reach for universal answers, universal descriptors much too readily. There's a lot more fluidity and variability than you are comfortable with in the universe. That's my opinion, but I assert it about you pretty regularly because we're different that way.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's easier to destroy a worldview of optimism than a worldview of curmudgeonry.
I agree.
But I think you can modify or change both of them over time if you make a concerted effort to do so. To me, the question becomes a question when I have a client that says, my life is not working. I am unhappy. I am anxious, I'm depressed, I'm angry, to the point that it interferes with my relationships or my success in life. Then I want to say to them, tell me more about that. How do you experience that? Where does that come from as far as you understand it? What's your first awareness that it's beginning to happen? Is it a physiological thing that happens, or does it happen and then afterwards you're like, oh crap, I just did that again? How soon after do you recognize that? I mean, what do you know about how this works in your life? And then can we find targets of opportunity to start to try to consciously and deliberately address ways for change? Now, the global question of if your fundamental personality orientation is curmudgeonly, can that change? I think that it can, but I think that it rarely does. I think that you may have a situational reason or window in your life where you can be different, but that when you go back to the reset mode, you go back to the set mode of being a curmudgeon, or being an optimist, if those are the two extreme alternatives. I think what I talk about in therapy with people all the time, when you choose to change, if you are conscious and deliberate and aware, you can attend to your reactions and behaviors in the direction of that change. But whenever you get blindsided or you go on autopilot, you will flash back to the preset. And therapy can teach you to recognize that that has happened quicker and allow you to change that response sooner and less expensively, and go back to being the person that you want to be. So you can work to become the person that you want to be. But life will always slap you upside the head and throw you back into the person that you were. And you can choose to overcome that. But you have to work at it. And it comes at a cost. And that cost is deliberate awareness and self-discipline. So you have to say, you know what? I'm going to give up ice cream for the rest of my life. Because I've got this condition and I can't have ice cream anymore. That sucks. I hate that. That's really bad. But I got to give it up. We know people that have had to do that about alcohol, had to do that for cigarettes, have had to do that for other reasons, and struggle with it, and sometimes act out and get punished. I'll act out and eat ice cream. I know it's going to tear my stomach up. I know I'm going to be sick for 3 days. But by God, I want it bad enough that I'll pay that price. I know I'm going to have a drink, and that's going to put me on the road to another relapse. I'll lose my family, I'll lose my job, I'll go to jail. But I want that drink, and I'm going to take it. Now, after you've done that, you need to say, hey, you know what? I walked into this with my eyes open. I chose this. I chose these consequences.
Right.
That's where people want an opt-out.
Exactly.
I need to do that, but it was because I was weak.
Right.
It was because I experienced pressure. It was because somebody made me do it. Not that I made that choice. So
Right.
therefore, I don't really want these consequences.
And we've talked about that in previous episodes, that where we think that things have gone awry or off the tracks is that people in modern times, and maybe it's been this way forever, but we're just aware of it in our lifespan, that consequences have really been something that people have played down. We're told
learned how to avoid as much as possible. Yeah.
I mean, since the meltdown of the banks during the Great Recession, now we have this philosophy that we can't allow banks to fail, and so the federal government just keeps on bailing them out. Well, if you keep bailing the banks out, then the people who are in charge of the banks are going to make risky investments because there is no consequence. And
well, the consequence is that if they're successful, they make a lot of money, and if they're unsuccessful,
right.
The government
then
comes
the
in.
government bails them out.
Yeah.
Now, do I want the banks to melt down? No, I don't want to go through another Great Recession or even worse. I'm not espousing that. I understand why the government makes that choice, but I also recognize that psychologically, there's no reason for those people then to change their behavior, the people in charge.
You got to change the consequences,
right.
change the rules.
Right.
And they're not willing to do that.
Yeah. I just think we're very, very consequence averse in our society today, that we don't believe.
Well, we believe in consequences for others.
But not for, ourselves, That's a good distinction. So I should be able to tell you how to live your life, but you shouldn't be able to tell me how to
I'm
live mine.
virtuous and I have righteousness on my side. Yeah.
Okay, let's run to our break and we'll pick this up on the other side. If you've gotten this far into the show, then obviously you find the show to be worthwhile, beneficial, maybe even helpful. And so I just wanted to say, if you've gotten this far into the show and you want to help us out, even if you don't want to help us out, just do it anyway. Go to Apple Podcasts and rate us and leave a review. That is super helpful. Subscribe to the show on YouTube and hit the bell icon so that you get notifications when new shows drop. That stuff is really, really helpful for us. And I know that Mr. Brett agrees.
Absolutely. Reviews are positive. Positive reviews are more positive, but negative ones are as well, because it helps you decide how to focus and how whatever you're intending to say is being heard.
And the secret is the algorithm doesn't care whether the review's positive or negative.
As our friend Mike Norton says regularly, feedback is a gift.
If it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike. Okay, we're back. So in the article, did you find any of that persuasive? Any of what was in the article? No. Okay. And why not?
I think so many. I think I try to stay focused on what my agenda is when we do this. How does this affect my knowledge base that I need to have in order to do therapy? How does this affect my approach to doing therapy with people? A lot of these conversations, a lot of these articles are more intellectual masturbation. At a higher level, can we just sit around and postulate, I bet this is interesting, and then can we do research to find out? I find that to be of interest, but it's not where I want to focus myself for these conversations. So I keep asking when I read these things, how does this impact either my fundamental knowledge base that I need in order to approach a stranger who walks into my office and says, why are you here and how can I help you, and how do I approach that? So I have to ask, are we generally psychologically interested, or is this going to be useful for me as a therapist? And this is psychologically interesting.
Right. So it's the difference between something that's theoretical and something that's applied.
Yes.
Yeah. And I agree 100%.
Or applicable.
Yeah. And when I think about malleability of personality, though, I go back to what you were talking about in the first segment, and that is that people oftentimes have an opportunity to change a behavior. They come to therapy and they change a behavior.
Yeah.
That doesn't necessarily change
An orientation to
their
life.
right,
Yeah.
their personality. But if they change the behavior consistently enough, that could change their orientation to life. And I think that's where I see the difference, is that we can choose to identify and change a behavior, and we do that for a little while, and we have good success with it, and then we leave therapy and we go out and we just live our lives. And what happens is that over time, that change process starts to break down, because we default to what we learned when we were young. And my idea is that we learn our personality, in those first 2-3 pre-verbal years of life, when we're infants and we're looking at the modeling of the caregivers in our lives. And if we're going to really change that, we may have to challenge some of the conclusions that we developed during that developmental period. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I'm thinking, as you're saying that, you had mentioned earlier that in the 80s and 90s, when you were in school, you were taught that personality is,
Right.
and it doesn't change.
Right.
And what I'm remembering is that there was a discussion about the theory of, does an infant come into the world with a personality? Or is he just the tabula rasa, as he comes in and he's blank, and society writes on the page? And the research was about babies that were open to contact and warmth and emotionally surrounding.
So Chess is the guy who did a lot of that research, and he called that temperament.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Or they are born at the moment of birth with a resistant, avoidant temperament that says, I don't want to be messed with, leave me alone. So if you start with a premise, because the question was being asked, how do babies develop as babies that are engaging and encompassing and connective, and babies that are avoidant? And the sooner we recognize, can we head off pitfalls for either side, where they're too susceptible and too open and too embracing, and they don't learn the danger signals? Because again, are you born with a recognition of certain danger signals? And those are fascinating discussions. And then somebody comes in with, as an adult or an adolescent, needing or wanting therapy. Do you approach your understanding of them from that perspective? As an infant, were you too open? Were you too avoidant? I don't know. I don't, but others may. I don't know.
Now, I think that again, that's an intellectual conversation, and one that I find
but it frames
stimulating.
you as a therapist, your understanding and your approach.
Yeah.
What are you doing? Why are you doing it this way? And how do you get to the meat in the coconut for the client who's in distress? Why are you distressed? What is distressing about your life or your relationships? What part of that comes from just being who you are? For instance, does that cause you to select from a pool? We often say to people, if you go to the convention center and there are 10,000 people there, your radar or your radio channel is going to be set on a certain frequency. You're only going to see the people on your frequency. So one of the challenges, especially if you are surviving the loss of an intense relationship and you're wounded and you're hurt and you say, well, I don't want this to happen to me again. One of the things that we say to people is you need to reset the frequency on the radio dial, because if you go back to that convention center, you'll find 300 more of the same person. So how can we get you to look at somebody else? And they'll come in there and say, well, I see these other people, but man, they're not attractive. I don't want to be with them. There's something off-putting about them. And we say, for a while, maybe you shouldn't date anybody that you're attracted to.
Exactly.
Maybe you should find somebody you're not attracted to and date them.
If I had $1 for every time I've said that, I'd have a lot of dollars.
Yeah.
But I don't know if this is a true statement. You can correct it if it isn't. I think that probably in therapy, I spend much more time focused on the clients very young interactions with the world, specifically primary caregivers, than maybe you did, because for me, that really informs from the object relations Heinz Kohut perspective, where I think their emotional regulation developed.
Okay, so I don't know how you spend your time, but from what you say, that's what you do and how you do it, and you think the relevance of that is critical to success. I approach it more from a triage perspective. Where does it hurt? Where are you bleeding? Let's stop the bleeding. Then let's go back and figure out how you got hurt. You know, if you've been playing with knives, maybe we need to learn how to be more skillful with knives or to avoid knives. But initially, we have to say, let's stop the bleeding.
Yeah.
So my approach, if that's a difference, that would be the difference.
Right. But in the end, you're right, that even if I spend time looking into what that very early relationship was, I may get to a point where I believe, okay, I think that the foundational issue here is that this individual feels unlovable by most people in their lives because of the way that they were
early
developed.
Life experiences.
Yeah. And so for you may talk about, oh, this person doesn't like me, this person doesn't like me, this person, and you may get to the same place, and guys may say, oh, well, maybe you feel unlovable because of early experience. And that often happens, is that you and I start from different places, end up in the same place.
Because I'm thinking particularly of somebody we both know very, very well, who complains that they lose jobs on a regular basis because their bosses are all stupider than they are. I know so much more than they know. They're not willing to acknowledge that. And also because they want me to follow these rules that I think are just ridiculous. And so I'm not going to do that because I know better. And then they're distraught that they're unemployed or that their relationships have ended for similar relationship-based arguments. Your approach to that is to go back and say, well, obviously you felt unloved as a child. My approach to that would be to say, can we change your behaviors? Can we change your skill sets so that this doesn't keep happening to you?
Right.
The thing I'll say pretty regularly to somebody, if you touch the stove and it's hot, don't touch the stove again. What you want to do is say, well, let me explain how the heat radiates through your fingertips and goes into your blood cells. And up to your central nervous system and into the medulla. I don't go there.
But in the end, I think that.
But we both end up saying, take your hand off, so don't put it back.
Right. And you have to do that consistently enough that becomes your habituated behavior. And the point at which you do that consistently enough that it becomes your habituated behavior, I think that is the beginning of a change in personality.
Okay.
And so that, to me, is what's different now than when I was younger and still in school and new in my career, is that I really thought that it was immutable, it was unchangeable. And now I see personality as a much more fluid and dynamic thing than I have ever recognized.
But you came into this out of the addiction model.
Yes.
The addiction model was, man, you're an addict. You're always going to be an addict.
Right.
And we're going to have to just like whack-a-mole. And whenever that addiction rears its head, we're going to have to whack it on the head. And it'll pop up somewhere else, but this is a lifetime journey.
Yeah. And now you're absolutely right. That is what I was indoctrinated into. And now I see even that as so much more fluid and so much more dynamic than I did back in the 80s. Absolutely.
So over the 30 years that I've worked with you, I've managed to change your personality. Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Yeah.
And for the better?
Well, that's yet
remains
to be seen. I think that's really up to the other people in my life. So you'd have to interview them and see what they think.
Yeah.
Right. So this was another really, really good conversation, and I appreciate that you're on fire today.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know what
life is good.
I guess you had Wheaties for breakfast.
Not raining inside. That's right.
If you are listening to this and you want to support the show, you can send us checks. That would always be acceptable. But you can go onto the interwebs. You can find us on YouTube and subscribe to the show. Hit the notification button so that you're always aware of when we drop a new episode, and that is really, really appreciated. You can go on Apple Podcasts and find us at Psych with Mike and leave us a rating and a review, and that helps other people find the show, which we really appreciate. The music that appears in Psych with Mike is written and performed by Mr. Benjamin DeClue, and if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike.